Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Maxwell's House is brought to you by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
Hi, this is Ray Maxwell, along with co-host Kristen Sanford, and this is episode 61 of Maxwell's House. Today, the title is Ray's Ramblings.
This episode of Maxwell's House is brought to you by Audible.com. For a free audiobook download of your choice, go to audiblepodcast.com/house. Welcome, everybody, to Maxwell's House. I'm Dr. Kiki Sanford, and I'm on the show today with Ray Maxwell. And today, the show is titled Episode 61, Ray's Ramblings, because Ray is going to take us a number of places that include answering your questions related to the Color series that he just finished up last week in Episode 60, as well as talking about issues related to car safety and multitasking, which is something that I am trying to do as we speak. So without any further ado, Ray, I'd love to hear what you have to say about Toyota.
Well, I mentioned it a little bit last week, but I'm concerned that we don't get into a mass panic over the... Now, let me say right up front, there's no question there are problems that Toyota has, but I have heard a number of analysis by some of the drivers that have had problems, and while I don't doubt for 1 second that they had a problem, I'm not sure that the analysis of what caused the problem is necessarily correct. I've certainly seen this in the past. There was a very, very tragic accident many years ago now. This is 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Where
I'll leave the car brand out, but years ago, there was once again this thing that the car suddenly accelerated. And in this case, the woman was backing out of her driveway and, she thought she was stopped in her driveway. And then she noticed her child behind the car and she jabbed for the brake. And in the final analysis, they believe that she actually hit the gas. But she was certain that the car accelerated all on its own. So what I'm saying is in a panic situation, it's hard to say for sure exactly what happens in those cases. I am not suggesting that people are doing that in the Toyota case, but we have to be very careful that we don't cause a mass panic. Like one person suggested in one of these cars that the brakes the brake pedal is not mechanically connected to the actual brakes. Now, I believe that that may or may not be true in the case of the Prius because it is a hybrid, and I do know that they use some eddy current braking or electronic braking using the motor, the electric motor, as a brake.
Right.
So
the regenerative braking you're talking about.
So there definitely could be a software problem there, or who knows, an electronic problem that they have to solve to make sure those brakes always work. But I have a Toyota Sienna van, which is not one of the recalled cars. It's not on the list. But I went out and checked myself because I wanted to know. And in that case, there is no question the brake pedal is directly mechanically connected to the master cylinder that, compresses the hydraulic fluid that goes directly to the brakes. Now, there's a power assist, but even if that power assist goes, if you hammer those brakes hard enough, the brakes always work from a mechanical point of view, unless the hydraulic line is broken or what have you. So all I'm saying is in some of the cars, there's no question that, there's been reports of the brakes not working. And then suddenly working later. And of course that doesn't fit with, if there's a hydraulic line broken, it won't work at all. Any rate, just all I'm saying is we have to be very careful in our analysis. I hope that news commentators will be very careful in their analysis. There's no question there are some problems, and Toyota's got to fix them. And but we have to get to the science of the thing and really understand what's wrong and be sure we fix the right thing and that we don't create a panic.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very important point to be making, because it's something that as people we tend to want to do. We jump to conclusions. We hear a lot of anecdotal stories like those that were brought up during the congressional hearings, the Senate hearings yesterday, or I guess was it yesterday? This last week. And you hear these stories and you feel for the people who went through these experiences. And there's no, I mean, yes, if they are telling you these experiences, then they went through them. You know, they believe what they're saying. They had an experience. But what exactly caused that is what's in question. And the floor mat issue, in some instances, it might be floor mats, but that might not be what the problem is 100% of the time. It might be a software glitch some of the time in some of the models. It might be a brake issue in other cars. So there is the problem that we could run the risk of solving, quote unquote, solving the problem and not actually doing anything to fix it.
Precisely. No, that's it. We have to be very careful and not jump to conclusions or fool ourselves. We have to do a very careful analysis and find out exactly what the root cause is, because if we jump to the wrong conclusion, we could skip over what the real problem is and you know, lead to additional accidents.
Right.
So we have to be very careful. Well, enough on that. The next topic is my most controversial, and if Alex Lindsay were in the Twit Cottage, we'd have an interesting debate, because he and I debated this in the green room of the lab.
I don't plan on debating anything with you.
I wanted to speak to the news media item where there was two people were shot, luckily not killed, in Colorado within 3 miles of Columbine. I'm sure that town, you know, Littleton, Colorado, is just shaking from this. But as luck would have it, there were 2 things that prevented it from turning into a mass killing. Number one, there was a very dedicated, very logical, rational math teacher who had knowledge of rifles and guns. And the other important fact that came out of that the math teacher noted, was that it was a bolt-action rifle. Now, what does that mean? That means that after you fire one shot, you have to mechanically take your right hand and take it off of the trigger, grab this lever, lift up, pull back, chamber another bullet, push it back, and close the chamber. And of course, that takes time.
Yep.
And this teacher knew that. And when I think it was actually right after the second shot was fired, he was close enough to this person, this happened out of doors, that he knew that he could tackle the person before they could chamber another bullet. And that's what he did, which was incredibly brave. In one interview, I heard him say it was either brave or the stupidest thing I've ever done. But
that is a question, right?
Which I thought was incredibly honest of him. But he, you know, in the end, he did the right thing, because he did manage to tackle the guy and keep him from chambering another bullet before anyone got there. Now,
wow.
Here's the controversial part.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to preface this with, I am a gun owner. I have 2 rifles. I have those rifles because I used to own, for 14 years, I owned a float plane. I flew it into extreme wilderness areas in Canada and Alaska. I have encountered both black and grizzly bears in the lakes that I have flown into. I never had to shoot one. However, I did see them. They always ran away, never bothered us. But I always felt better that I had a Marlin 444 rifle. Now, that's a very powerful rifle. And I don't hunt. And the only reason I had the rifle was now this is not true now, but at the time I used to fly up to Alaska, it was a requirement that if you flew a float plane into Alaska, you had to carry a rifle in your survival kit. It was required.
Yeah.
And I have to say, if you fly into places where you see big bears, it always made me feel better to know as a last resort that I had that rifle, to protect myself and the people with me.
Yeah.
And
I had a research advisor who but he did his postdoctoral research in Siberia. And he spent a lot of time alone out in the Siberian wilderness. And he had a gun for that exact purpose of protection against bears, dangerous wildlife, and also dangerous people. So when you're out there alone in the middle of nowhere, you have to do what you need to protect yourself.
Precisely. I have to say, I didn't encounter any dangerous people in either Canada or Alaska. But I'll just tell you one. I'll digress. When I found out that to fly to Alaska, I needed a rifle. Now, I grew up in Missouri, and I grew up with relatives who hunted, and I had a rifle and a shotgun as a young teenager, and I used to go out and hunt squirrel and quail and you name it. To be honest, I personally lost interest in it. So I didn't, when I first got the float plane, I didn't have a rifle on hand or a sufficient. I had a little .22, but that's not what you want to shoot at a bear. And all you do is make him really.
I know, they'd
really
be
mad.
swatting at it like mosquitoes.
That's right. So it was quite funny. I went shopping for a proper bear rifle, and I didn't have much luck in the lower mainland of Vancouver because, to be fair, the gun regulations in Canada are much more strict than the U.S., and so they don't have as many gun stores. Plain and simple. The other thing is to own a rifle in Canada, you have to apply with the police force, and they run you through their database. It takes 2 weeks. You have to wait 2 weeks, a minimum, to have a background check done on you, and then you get a permit that allows you to purchase a firearm. You have to have another permit to actually show that you have the training to operate it. And if you want to hunt, you need a third permit hunting. Any rate, so I went down to Bellingham, Washington, to go shopping for a rifle. I went into the U.S. because they have more gun stores, and I walked into this gun store, and man, they had every kind of gun and pistol and rifle under the sun. And the guy said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I have a float plane, and I'm going to be flying into wilderness areas, and here's what I want." I said, "Number one, I'm not a hunter. I'm not interested in hunting, not anymore. But here's my specification. I want a rifle. It doesn't have to be a long-range rifle. In fact, I'm not going to shoot at anything unless it's within 50 feet and closing on me. However," I said, "I want a rifle that if there is a bear less than 50 feet from me and he's coming at me, I want to fire this rifle, and if I hit him in the paw, I want it to kill him." and this guy behind the counter says, "I've got just the thing."
Of course he did.
So he brings out a Marlin 444, which throws a slug about this big around, and has a powder charge and has a knockdown force in foot-pounds that will, render a bear very
senseless,
dead in a hurry. So, at any rate, that's how I ended up with that rifle. But I have to say that if you look at the statistics, and going back to our main story, if that young man who shot those two kids and luckily only wounded them, If he had had an assault rifle with a 50-shot magazine and it was a semi-automatic or a fully automatic rifle, there would be a bunch of dead people right now.
Yeah.
And I, as a former hunter, know that I do not need an assault rifle to hunt with. A bolt action or lever action, which is the rifle I have, it's lever action, is perfectly adequate to hunt any kind of game you want. And if you have a 5-shot magazine, that's all the shots you need. If you need more than that, to kill game, you need to go out and practice on the target range.
Go to work, yeah.
But at any rate, just as a statistic, in Canada, where we have much more restricted, it's almost impossible to buy a pistol in Canada unless you're a law officer. And it requires some extreme permits and so forth, and you can only use a pistol at a gun club that has been licensed by the RCMP and been inspected by them, and you have to file the route that you're going to follow. You have to have a safe to keep it in. It's very difficult to have any kind of concealable weapon in Canada.
Yeah, but what about what kind of a black market is there, though? I mean, here in the United States, it's easier to get guns here than it is in Canada. There are more people with guns, but you have the gun under your dad's bed, or you have, what's in the closet, or the one that you bought from the guy behind the liquor store.
Right. Well, let me say that Canada has a population 1/10 of that of the U.S., and yet we have more than 100-to-1 less shootings with guns because there are just not as many guns available.
Yeah.
And I've heard that argued against that, but it's just a fact. We don't have nearly and where
Maybe
there are
you also don't have angry people. I don't know.
No,
it's Canada. Everybody's happy.
Our cultures are very, very similar. We see all the same media. We play all the same violent video games. All of that is very, very much the same. Now, there are other cultural differences, but the exposure to media and to violence and so forth, we're as exposed to it here in Canada as the U.S., but we don't have as many guns. And the other thing is in investigations into criminal acts committed with guns, most of the time in Canada, they can trace an illegal weapon back to the U.S. That's where it came from and was imported, all right? And in fact, they closed the government agency, Tobacco Firearms, what is it? They closed down a gun store in Georgia, I think it was Georgia, where they had a supply line going from this store up into Montreal and Toronto. And they were smuggling guns in by the ton. And they traced something like 80% of all the guns used in illegal activities in Canada
back
to this
that
one gun store. Yeah. And now the U.S. government cooperated with the RCMP and finally shut them down. But, any rate, that's my pitch on guns. I am a gun user. I'm a gun owner, but I don't see any need in concealable weapons. They're fine for hunting. They're fine for protecting a float plane, but
yeah, and this is something that people will argue. It is a I don't know that it's necessarily. I guess it's controversy. I mean, I think it's debatable. I don't know if it's necessarily controversial. I think it's, this is something that some people want to be able to conceal their weaponry. They want to be able to move about easily without people knowing that they have a gun or multiple guns. I know that there's probably some aspect of here in the United States the right to bear arms and the right to take up those arms against your own government if that situation should so occur. And there are lots of people who take that very seriously and want to maintain their gun rights, their gun ownership rights, and within that, concealable gun rights.
Those people who want to use their guns to take over the government do not understand democracy or how to vote, how to influence their government.
Right, but the where it comes up is if our democratic government were to one day become undemocratic, if it were to become a dictatorship, if it were to change from democratic to something where the people were no longer listened to, or maybe it became a military state, the people, in that case, the Constitution's pretty much null and void to begin with. The Bill of Rights gone. But the idea is that the people should have their right to have guns in case to keep that situation from occurring.
Right.
I mean, this is the argument that I've read and I've heard before.
Yeah, the right to bear arms, where do you limit it? If I am a nuclear physicist, do I have the right to build my own A-bomb and keep it in my basement?
Yeah.
Do I have the right to buy, if I have the money, do I have the right to buy a supersonic jet surplus and arm it with a nuke so that I can feel good? I mean.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, where do you draw the line? See, I love flying, all right? And the Constitution says, life, liberty, and the pursuit of the Declaration of Independence says the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. Well, my pursuit of happiness is flying.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to have a medical. I shouldn't have to have a license. I shouldn't have to prove that I've had all this training. Mm-hmm. I should be able to hop in an airplane and fly. And if I endanger other people, you see where I'm going with that.
Too bad. It's my rights of liberty and.
You have to look at what are the dangers, what are the cost versus risks analysis here, and what's the cost to our society. All I can tell you is there are less people shot with guns in Canada per person.
Per capita, yeah.
Per capita than in the U.S., and I think that strongly correlates with the availability of weapons. Enough on that one.
And moving on to the next topic.
Now I wanted to.
Is this related to the guns in any way?
No. Okay. I hope not. Leo may shoot me, but I know that Leo is in love with his Nexus iPhone and loves the OLED screen. So one of our listeners sent me a URL pointing to a scientific study of the iPhone and the OLED on the Nexus phone, and pointing out that the OLED screen, one, does not produce as accurate a color. If you compare it to a calibrated proofing monitor, it oversaturates the color. Now, that will make charts and graphs and line art look like dynamite. But it overdoes photographs, and it also causes it doesn't use as many bits per color as the iPhone and some of the other phones do. And so if you put gradients in it, you put photographs with smooth gradients in it, they posterize on the Nexus phone. So it's all a matter of taste. Your graphics will snap, will look beautiful. The super saturated colors will knock your eye out, but that same phone doesn't reproduce video and still pictures as accurately as the iPhone. The iPhone doesn't do it perfectly either, just for the record. But I thought Leo would find that an interesting URL to have a look at. It's in the show notes, and if people want to read about it, it's just like. To be fair, half the homes I walk into, they have their HDTV, they have it set on vivid, and it drives me nuts, to have that super oversaturated color. I want more accurate color, and I want to be seeing color. I mean, I've carefully calibrated my HDTV to the broadcast standards so that I have a good chance of seeing what the director wanted me to see or what they're seeing on their calibrated monitors when they produce the program.
Right.
And but on the other hand, you go into almost any shop and they've got all the sets set to vivid so that, because that's what people tend to buy on. They buy the one with the most saturated,
the pretty colors.
Yeah. So, all right, now we'll get down to a little deeper topic.
That sounds good. Before you dig into a deeper topic, may I take a moment to do an advertisement.
Absolutely.
This episode of Maxwell's House is brought to you by Audible.com. To download a free audiobook of your choice, you can go to audible.com/house. audiblepodcast.com/house. audiblepodcast.com/house. And you can choose an audiobook out of their over 60,000 titles, different genres. They have science, they have technology, they have business, all sorts of interesting titles that you can pick from. Periodicals, if you don't want to hear a book read to you, you can actually hear a magazine or a newspaper of your choice. And Ray, did you have any ideas for a specific audiobook that people might be able to choose? Do you have anything interesting you're reading right now?
Well, I'm going to get next to read. I read one book by this author, and I want to read yet another. His name is Frank Schaeffer. Now, I have to give you a little history here. His father, Francis Schaeffer, was back in the 70s and 60s, was quite an interesting, what do I want to call him? He was a minister, a Christian minister. He had a retreat in Switzerland called Brie, and he had a very Calvinistic theology that he followed, and his son's name was Frank Schaeffer. And I won't tell you the whole story, but the important part is that this family, Francis Schaeffer, wrote the Christian Manifesto, which basically said the U.S. needed to become a theocracy or it was going to fall apart.
Wow.
And, of course, that does not agree with my thinking. But what is interesting is Frank Schaeffer played a role in all that as a young man, and they were quite good friends with the Jerry Falwell and all that group, and including the Bush family. And there's some really interesting stories about the mother Bush. Barbara.
Barbara Bush.
Had some prayer meetings about one of her sons during his drinking era with the mother of, or the wife of Francis Schaeffer. But at any rate, the book I'm going to mention is called Crazy for God, and it is a story. It is basically a biography and it is available on Audible by Frank Schaeffer, and he bought into all this as a young man, but as he became an adult and moved back into the U.S., where he expected to see a country just going to hell in a handbasket, he discovered that wasn't what was happening at all. And he completely did a 180. He's not an atheist, but he decided that this fundamentalist Christian Manifesto was not the way to go in a country. And it's a very good story of the inside story of what was happening in in my opinion, the extreme right-wing Christian movement. And he tells a lot of background about that and how he came to be, shall we say, enlightened, and changed his opinion of all that. So I just read another book of his, and I'm going to forget the title.
What was the name of this book again?
Crazy for God.
Crazy for God. That sounds like a great. It sounds really interesting. It sounds
it's a real inside story from the other, from that perspective, and then how he came to change his mind on some of these topics. Yeah, and I found it an interesting. And by the way, he was interviewed recently. What got me interested in him was on Point of Inquiry, which is a skeptic broadcast. Nice. And he was interviewed on that, and it's a very good interview if you want to hear more about him.
And for anyone who's interested in Crazy for God, you can try and find that audiobook at audiblepodcast.com/house, who are sponsoring this podcast today. Thank you very much, Audible, for your support. And what was the big topic that you were going to get to next?
Well, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the digital world. People, I've seen several television programs, and they're very worried. Recently, I saw a very good program on PBS called Digital Nation on Frontline. It was one of the Frontline programs, and it was authored by Douglas Rushkoff, who is another writer who I think has some Audible books you might look up. He writes on technology a lot, and oddly enough, he's from a Jewish background, and he wrote a very excellent book on Jewish theology as well as high tech. So he's another guy that I found quite interesting to read. But he produced this program called Digital Nation along with Rachel
Maddow? No.
Dreetzen, Dretzin. Mm-hmm. She was the director and producer of the show. But what they were concerned with is how absorbed people are getting in the virtual world of the internet and their computer. And they illuminated a number of concerns that different people had, different opinions they had about this. And I found that a thought-provoking show worth listening to. Now, let me give you my take on this, and then we can compare it with your take.
Yeah.
First of all, as a person who has spent years studying color science, let me say first, and I have done some studying about sound and taste and smell and touch, and studied the senses of the human being. And the first thing, I hate to break it to everybody, but our perception, that is the mental model we have of the world around us, is not always accurate. Our senses play games on us. For one thing, our senses are not linear. So our sense of the energy, whether it's light energy or sound or whatever, is logarithmic. Now, in fact, that I think that's very good because it means we can listen to a very quiet sound and not be blown away by a sudden loud sound. If we didn't have logarithmic hearing, if it was linear with regard to energy, we would be completely blown away by loud sounds. And there's a whole physiology of the ear and how it does that and how it has automatic gain controls, and it actually decouples with muscles some of the bones in our ears to keep us from being hammered by loud sounds. And
and there's actually a feedback loop that actually is kind of interesting in the cells of the ear, the hair cells. There's a feedback loop that actually makes those cells less sensitive. So as volume goes up, as the intensity of the energy increases, the sensitivity is decreased by an intracellular mechanism.
Exactly. So what I'm trying to say here is the world as we perceive it around us isn't necessarily real. Okay? Yeah. We live in the virtual world of our brains.
Yeah.
And that's what we think of, at first look. We think what we perceive in our brains is reality, when in fact, if we use other instruments and sensors and measure these things around us, we find that our eyes and ears don't always tell us exactly what the truth is. It's an approximation, and it works. The perception we have is very carefully adapted to our survival and getting along in the world. And it was, done over millions of years of evolution, but it isn't necessarily the reality. So what I'm trying to say is, in a kind of funny way, we already live, our brains live in a virtual world. And particularly with color vision, other animals don't see color the way we do at all. There are some animals that have 4 light sensors that respond to 4 different wavelengths instead of 3.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah, exactly.
I want more.
Yeah, they can perceive ultraviolet, and there are snakes with heat sensors that pick up very long wave heat radiation that we don't. And so they perceive the world quite differently than we do. So our perception is a human perception, and it is, when you think about it like that, it is a kind of virtual reality that we live in. Now,
Right.
if I pick up a lever and use it, it is, to me, just an extension of my arms and hands. If I use any kind of tool, if I fire up a machine with an engine in it, that is an extension of my muscles. And if I'm digging ditches with a backhoe, I'm just extending the things that I have of my human body and the power of it.
Yeah.
So now that brings us to the internet. And to me, the internet is just an extension of my eyes, ears, and brain, and an extension of the local library, and I could go on and on. It's just an extension, and it's just a tool for me. Now, like anything, if you go overboard on these things and, you live in Second Life 24 hours a day or something, it all comes back to an old saying that I believe in strongly: all things in moderation. Try it all, try everything. I certainly, in my life, if you know my hobbies, I've scuba dived, I've skydived, I've fly gliders, I fly power aircraft, hot air balloons. I'm interested in photography. I'm interested in art. I'm interested in music. I've led a choir. I love it all, but I don't, focus my whole life in one of those areas to the exclusion of the others. And I think it's a question of balance. So I love the internet. I love all the things I can do on it. What are your thoughts on that one?
I think that the internet, I just read this very interesting article this morning in Wired magazine, probably last month's issue, about internet addiction in China, and how in China it's a huge concern that the youth are becoming addicted, and everyone's becoming incredibly sensitive to addiction and what is addiction. If you're just sitting in front of a computer, you're addicted. And I think you're right with everything. Moderation is key, and balance in your life is crucial. However, pursuit of happiness, as we mentioned earlier in the show, is different for everyone. So your balance is also going to be different. And if you want to spend all your time working on a computer, doing stuff on a computer, then that's fine. I love the idea, though, of the idea of our brains as putting us in a virtual world. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently. I think it's a fascinating idea. If we think about what reality is, and we have our own version of reality that's produced by our own perceptions, visual, auditory, informational, all this information, data points that are coming into our brain and being used to construct our virtual reality. And then our virtual reality bumps up against our neighbor's virtual reality, and suddenly we have some shared aspects. So if you think of everybody's virtual reality with Venn diagrams signifying overlap, suddenly you have a lot of shared reality. And so as a result of these shared realities, we suddenly have and with more and more shared realities, we suddenly have a more and more accurate representation of what reality actually is.
Yes, more inputs,
yeah.
More data. We have to be, another favorite saying of mine, it's a bit of a trite saying, but I think it's so true. One fellow said, I don't know who it was, said, information is not knowledge, and knowledge is not wisdom.
No. Yes.
Okay. You need the information, and you can turn that into knowledge. In other words, unify the information into a collection of ideas and a way of thinking about something, or how to design something, or how to make something work. But then you have to have some judgment and wisdom in how you use that information and the knowledge. And I think that's very important.
I agree.
Now, another thing that came up in this program, the Digital Nation, that they were concerned about was they were concerned with the fact that they had done some studies, and a lot of young people today in university do a great deal of multitasking. And this is concerning some people. And they said that, today in the classroom, everybody's got a laptop and there's wireless connections in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so while they're listening to the professor droning on, if that's what he's doing, he shouldn't be, then they may be doing email, they may be doing Facebook, they may be tweeting, and some people objected to that. And of course, the real question is, how are they doing on the tests, and are they learning the information? And then, some professors were complaining that, gee, I have to put on a light show to get the attention of these people. They won't pay attention unless I'm really entertaining them. How should we deliver information? And they actually did some tests. Many of these young people felt that they could multitask and not miss a thing, but when they tested this, they found out they did. And I have a take on this. I think there are tasks that require multitasking and where you should practice how to multitask. And I think there are tasks that you cannot do and multitask. And I'll give you two examples out of my own life.
Okay.
One is flying an airplane. Flying an airplane, particularly flying an airplane on instruments. You have to, when you're doing that, you have to be scanning the instrument panel. You cannot stare at one instrument. If you stare at the one instrument and then put in the control motions to correct, whatever that instrument is telling you, and then wait till it's correct and then go to the next instrument will be off. You have to scan and get a picture in your head of the entire situation of that aircraft, its airspeed, its altitude, its attitude, and you have to check the engine instruments from time to time. And then you have to put in corrective inputs into the controls. Another example of multitasking is I was a flight instructor, and that's one of the highest workloads I've ever encountered in my life, because when I was instructing, I was flying out of international airports. I flew out of St. Louis Lambert Field in my young days, and then later out of Vancouver International Airport. And they at that time, they both had flying schools in those big airports. So I had to be instructing a student pilot. We had intercom systems. So I was talking through the intercom to my student. He was asking me questions through the intercom. I was listening to the radio. I had to not miss anything said on the radio, so I was situationally aware of the aircraft around me and what the air traffic controller was telling me. I had to know the complete situation of the aircraft, its airspeed, its attitude, its altitude, and the engine condition, throttle settings, etc. And I had to correct those things by speaking to the student.
Right.
Rather than manipulating the controls
instead
directly
of doing
myself.
it yourself. Yeah.
Now, that's a very high workload. And to be successful at that, you have to be able to multitask. But here's the key. The key is you have to prioritize those tasks. And in aviation, we have an old saying. I've said it on the program once before, but I think it illustrates the point again. And that is, you must aviate, navigate, and then communicate in that order. What that means is aviate means you have to be situationally aware at all times of your altitude, airspeed, attitude, throttle setting, the condition of the aircraft, and then navigate. Where are you and where are you going, and are you headed in the right direction, and are there any other aircraft in your vicinity? Mm-hmm. And then finally, you have to communicate. And you can't miss a communication coming to you, but you can sometimes wait to communicate to the other person if there's a higher priority task. So in multitasking, the secret to doing it successfully is prioritizing. If you're in a lecture, you better not miss something important in the lecture, but it may be, I don't know, it may be possible for some people who can prioritize their tasks. Now
right.
You've given lectures. What are your thoughts?
In terms of education and learning and what the best way is to absorb information and what we know about the brain and how the brain works. Attention, the more attention you put into a task, the more you will retain. The less, I mean, it's all processing power. You only have you have a set amount of processing power within your brain. And so if you're dividing all of your attention among a bunch of different tasks, something's got to give. If you are focusing only on one thing, like listening to the lecture that a professor's giving or your teacher's giving, then it's going to help a lot. In terms of how to keep students' attention, one thing that I learned when I was doing lectures is switching things up regularly. So about every 7 to 10 minutes, do something new. So either switch to a different type of media or switch to a different topic, surprise them somehow, do something, jump up and down. Yeah, but it definitely, you have to take into account the length of time that people can focus, which is usually uninterrupted. People can focus for about 7 to 10 minutes.
Right.
And in that amount of time, you can do some pretty good and give some good information out. And then you switch it to something else, give them a little break or get their mind working on a different direction, and then you move it back again. And so if you can modulate attention as a lecturer, you will be much more successful at getting information out to your students and keeping their attention. Don't forget, Shakespeare used comic relief. Yeah. That's part of it. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the many things in his plays that make them great is he throws in comic relief so that when the heavy stuff, you've had about all of it you can, and he throws in something and gives you a little break and then back into it.
McMahon in the IRC says set a student on fire. That would probably that would get some attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the right kind of attention, though.
Yeah, have somebody run in, And then the other area that I wanted to speak on is I can give another illustration out of my life where I don't think it's possible to multitask at all. And that's when I was writing software. When I am writing software, I would sit down and draw my flowcharts and everything. And you can use pseudocode. You can use all kinds of diagrammatical tools and things to get your thoughts in order. But when I'm finally coding, I found that and I like to work not in an open area when I'm writing software. I like to be in a closed office, and I like to close my doors so nobody can come in easily, and preferably turn off the phone. Because I found that when I was really writing critical software and really difficult software that dealt with a lot of things at once, it took me a certain amount of time to get the entire picture into my head of all the things that I was trying to do with that particular module. Yeah. And that now, of course, you have to break it down into modules, and to a large extent, object-oriented programming helps you do this. But I found that if somebody interrupted me, and when I was in the middle of one of those intense sessions, it would take me sometimes 10 or 15 minutes to get back to where I was ready to write the next line of code, because I needed that intense focus and get that intense picture in my head. So, and by the way, while we're on that the topic of multitasking, I don't believe there's anybody that can drive a car and text. I think it's possible to talk on the phone with a hands-free system. I have one myself, but again, I give 98% of my attention to driving that car. And if somebody asks me a very difficult question, I'll say, I'll call you back and talk about that later.
Right.
Because I don't want to be distracted from my driving.
Yep.
So I think there are things you can do to mitigate against that, but I certainly
that means that you would have to be aware of your own shortcomings, though, Ray.
Right.
I mean, what?
but I learned that in flying. I learned what required my attention, and I learned how to communicate without doing that. And by the way, a lot of flying can be and driving can be, if you practice it enough, a reflex. Like, for instance, I can juggle 3 balls all day long and talk to you about anything. But my conscious mind isn't doing the juggling. Okay? It's entirely a muscle reflex. And you have to get the particular skill that you're doing to that level before your conscious mind is free to do anything else. Yeah. Any rate, it's a thought. Now, we're getting pretty close to running out of time, so I am thinking I may just cover one question on the color science things.
Sounds great. Maybe we can save some more for next week.
Yeah, we'll save some more of those questions for next week. If people do have questions about any of the topics that I've covered, please write me at ray@twit.tv, and I'll try and answer those questions. And I try and answer as many of the emails as I can. I don't always answer all of them directly, but I do try and answer them either on the program or directly. So with that, let me speak about monitor profiles. One of the shows we talked about calibrating the monitor, and one of our fans wrote in to say that he really appreciated that show and that he's been playing with switching monitor profiles, and he feels that he's getting better color. Now, let me just warn about one thing. Monitor profiles, the kind that you make with either a colorimeter, default profiles that come with your computer, or profiles that you make with a visual tool. For instance, the Mac comes with a calibration tool that allows you to visually calibrate your monitor. And it also comes with some default profiles that are labeled clearly LCD monitor profile. All of those profiles, those monitor profiles, are special, and they are not the same as editing profiles. Editing profiles like sRGB and Adobe 98 and ProPhoto are not good monitor profiles. So don't select those as a monitor profile. The reason why is because the monitor profiles have an additional entry in the profile called a gamma LUT, lookup table. And that is what calibrates your monitor to a gamma of 1.8 or 2.2 or what have you. So you have to have that lookup table in there to properly set your monitor. If you switch from a monitor profile to one of the editing profiles like Adobe 98 or sRGB or something and choose that as a monitor profile, usually it empties the LUT. So it's not deterministic what you're going to get in the lookup table, and those are not the thing you want to select in making in selecting a monitor profile. You want to use a profile that's either a default monitor profile sent to you by your computer company, use a visual calibration program that comes with your computer to visually calibrate it, or the best, of course, is to get a colorimeter and make a color profile that using that instrument for your either colorimeter or spectrophotometer for your specific monitor. That's absolutely the best. And so next week, I will talk about editing profiles when they're appropriate, give you a little more detail, and I'll talk a little bit. I won't go into too much detail because not very many people have to use CMYK profiles. But if you are separating your pictures to be sent to a print shop, you do have to know something about CYMK profiles and how to make separations for a print shop, or how to instruct the printer to make the separations for you. So we'll cover that next week. And if somebody wants to, in the chat room, I'll pay attention here. If you've got a better name than Ray's Ramblings, by all means, suggest
we can give it a different name.
Yeah. I'm certainly open to that. So we'll see if anybody comes up with anything. But that's, I thought I would wrap it up with that. We started pretty much on time today. And
we did.
So we'll wrap on time and let you get into your next show on time.
Great. Well, the chat room is saying so far that they love Ray's ramblings. What else do we have in here? We have Ray's Rainbow Show.
Yeah. Ray's porridge.
Elephant guns. Ray's porridge. This is good. This is good. I love the Ray's wisdoms.
Ray traces. I like
Ray
that.
traces. Yes. Tidbits of wisdom from Ray.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Rambling Ray. There's another one.
Ray's pearls. That's good as well. Pearls of wisdoms.
No,
these are some good suggestions.
Yeah, that belongs on floss. Ray's pearls.
That's hilarious. Very punny.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ray. This has been very great. This was an very interesting tour through your house this week. I think we hit a bunch of different topics that I think were interesting in different ways to different people. And so I think this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was wandering a bit today, but I think it's fun to do that occasionally.
Yeah. Do you have any preview of what we might be talking about next week?
I'm still working on that. I am going to answer more questions on color that have come in, but I'm still working on what I'm going to do for the main big topic next week.
Cool. All right. So we'll hit some color questions that people didn't quite get answered yet, and to be determined, the surprise topic for next week on Maxwell's House.
And who knows what will happen in the news this week?
Exactly. If I could tell the future, why would I read the news?
Right.
Yes. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching and for listening. This is Maxwell's House, and Ray and I will be back next week to talk about more things that come from Maxwell's House.
We'll see you then.